What's up, illustrators? So let's do a critique of our creatures and eyeballs and things in jars, jar specimens. That was the challenge. So let's do a critique. I'm just going to start on the top and work my way down. This one is almost perfect. Very, very, very nice. I don't have any real criticisms. I have some aesthetic criticisms. A couple things are the tag, the sticker on the top. The jar to me kind of, well, it depends on what you're trying to show. If you're trying to show an old jar that's been there for a while, then I feel like the tag should not be pure white. Like this looks like a pristine sticker that was just put on there. If this is an old jar, it should be kind of like faded and yellow and maybe even some scratches on it. And I also feel like there should be something written on the tag. Like that would just add a little bit. When you get to the point where you're really making perfect creations, you need to start pushing it even more in terms of style points and pushing it in terms of how can you put your personal touch in this, which I already feel like it definitely has a lot of your personal touch. But you always want to try to push it further and further. So you could have added something on the tag, something that represented you or something written that you thought was funny or an inside joke, something like that, just a suggestion. Another thing that I've noticed about the bottle is I think it was, and this doesn't bother me, but I think that the glass is the shaping of the glass is in some regions a little bit awkward. And the reason it doesn't bother me is because glass does tend to warp with age. So I feel like this is sort of like a warped bottle that has some regions that have been warped because glass is a liquid. But if that's the case, then that means it's an old bottle and the tag should not then be pristine. So just a couple final, I guess, like stylistic, aesthetic criticisms. But overall, this is really a strong piece, a beautiful piece, perfect piece. I don't really have any real criticisms of it. All right, here's the next one. This one's a little bit more cartoony. I think you're going to really like when we transition to Illustrator. I think you're going to love Illustrator and the possibilities for sort of like more cartoony artists that brings out. I think you're going to love that. I think the bottle is a good start in terms of capturing the bottle, but I think that the sides, the edges of the bottle where you have these dark brown lines, I'm not sure that that's contributing to the piece. So you might have tried to reduce the opacity a little bit on these line layers to make it to just make those lines a little bit less sharp. I feel like the cork is done really well. A lot of people had trouble with corks. I think this is one of the better corks that we've seen in some of these pieces. I like that you've added individual highlights in the bubbles. I think that was a good decision. But I think overall, in general, it's just a little bit too brown. And it's sort of, it's not drawing me to this piece. So I'm not sure the brown helped you out here. All right, here's the next one. I think this is one of your better pieces. I think that this is a really effective use of your style here. A really good capturing of the bottle. I really am attracted to this rounded white highlight. I think that was a really good decision. I think you've, how do I want to say it? I think the cork needs a little bit more texture. Like you've treated the cork in the exact similar way as you have drawn the glass bottle. And in one sense that works because again, you're using the same style to capture all the elements. So that works in the sense that it all feels like it comes from the same universe. So that works out really well. But I don't feel like the texture of the cork has been completely captured. And there might be some room for improvement there on this cork. I think that the white part of the eyeball is, I think, called the sclera. I think that the sclera is less effectively treated as the inner, like the iris and the pupil. So I think the pupil and the iris were done with a very sort of like photorealistic style, and then the sclera of the eyeball was done with the same style as the glass and the cork. So the one point at which you have a little bit of non-uniformity is right in the middle of the eyeball. And again, like you didn't do this poorly. This is very well done. It's just not in the same style as the eyeball and the glass and the cork. So you just have to be a little bit careful about changing styles where you're implementing things. But overall, very well done. And I think you two, again, when we move to Illustrator, I think you're really going to enjoy the sort of the cartoon aspects of Illustrator. I think it's going to really open up a lot of possibilities for you. All right, this one's next. This one, I think the eyeball is really fantastic. The eyeball is just phenomenal. Really photorealistic, really great, amazing capturing of the eyeball. The jar is just not doing it for me, though. Especially when, again, when you have a photorealistic eyeball in a non-photorealistic jar, it's jarring. So, fantastic job on the eyeball. I think you would all agree with me here. And I think you would also agree with me that the jar, not quite done to the best of the capability that I know that you have. But really just utterly fantastic on the eyeball. Everybody's doing human eyeballs. This surprises me. Here's another one. I wish I knew what this eyeball was, because this eyeball is really interesting and really compelling to me. It's really drawing me in. I love the eyeball. I think, again, similar, very same criticism here, where the eyeball is done really, really well. It's a jar that's not doing it for me. You got a good start with this highlight here and this highlight here on the jar, and the fact that the highlight's coming over the eyeball. I like that. But the sides of the jar, the bottom of the jar, that this is sort of like a little bit awkward, a little bit off. The cap of the jar is a little bit awkward. It's non-symmetrical. It's again, the eyeball is amazing. It's fantastic. And I really wish I knew what kind of eyeball this was. But the jar is not doing it for me. This might be one of the most compelling eyeballs I've seen in the assignments. So I really want to know what this is. Let me know. I'm not going to lie, I have a lot of criticism here. The eyeball isn't perfectly round. It was pretty sloppy, the outline that she did here. The jar, it's real scratchy. Again, this is the same issue that I talked to you about before, which you haven't learned to fix yet. It's very, very scratchy. You haven't learned to draw at fine pixelation to the point where that scratchiness goes away. So I'm not sure what the error is that's being done there. I think it's perhaps now the brushes that you've been picking. You're not picking, for whatever reason, you're picking brushes that make this real pixelated and scratchy. But you have made some advances in a sense that now you're learning, you address the criticism that I've discussed before, where you're now starting to try to shade and blend colors in infinite gradations. So I see here you've taken the black blurry brush and you're sort of painting the sides of the jar so that it becomes rounded, which is a good start, but you've only done it here. For some reason, you stopped doing it on the top. That doesn't work. I don't know why you made that decision. You didn't continue to do the shading in the eyeball around the edges like you did here. I don't know why you chose to do that. So it's like you just chose to shade very small parts of this, but not all the others. You didn't do any shading or highlights in the bubbles. I like the highlight on the eye. Again, I think the iris and the pupil of your eye are quite good. So I think you've made steps here towards color. But there's a lack of consistency. There's a lack of sort of high quality. It's real scratchy. It's just not real high quality. I like your jokes. I can tell that you have an inner sense of cartooning because you are incorporating some jokes. So I want to compliment you here on sort of developing your own aesthetic style and putting in your own style points. But I think you can do better, and I really hope that you improve on the next ones.
I'm excited for the Illustrator.
This is a fantastic eyeball. Really a great improvement for you coming in to color here. Really photorealistic eyeball. But again, same criticism that people are having over and over and over is the eyeball looks fantastic. The jar is not doing it for me. You started to get a good sense of the jar with this highlight here and these highlights in the background, but the bottom of the jar, this part looks good, but the very, very bottom where it's the roundness of it is so awkward. It's not how it would appear visually. And the stiffness of the sides, like I feel like the darkness of these sides is distracting in a sense. I'm not sure if it's wrong. Like it might actually look like that, but it's just the composition as a whole is awkward in some places, especially down here and these corners. I think these corners are detracting from the roundness of the jar. The lip of the jar, this is totally messed up. The cork of the jar, I think this was a good experiment And I can tell that you were like, okay, well, how can I treat the cork? And you did an experiment, and you tried to treat it in a way. And I think it works to some sense, but it's not doing it for me completely. And I think what you could have done to make this a little bit better is once you get to this point, start to reduce the opacity on these dark black lines. That would cause them to fade a little bit back. It wouldn't be so jarring. I know I already made that joke. And I think blending a little bit more, infinite blending of these dark browns with the light browns would help you out here a little bit. These highlights, these scratchy highlights, aren't doing it for me. I don't know what made you choose to do like these scratchy highlights. I would do highlights either like this, like clear kind of like thick solid highlights, or you can do sort of like infinite blend highlights like with the blurry brush. But the eyeball is fantastic. Really, really good. The one critique of the eyeball that I have is again sort of like the awkwardness of not getting perfect symmetry here. Like the pupil and the iris, it's not perfectly round. That causes me to it's a little bit bothersome to me, but maybe it's a good thing, because maybe in a sense that it's sort of like dried out, and maybe that perfect symmetry would fall apart if it was starting to kind of like dry up and shrivel. So again, not a complete criticism, because it doesn't bother me that much. The part of the eyeball that bothers me a lot is this part right here, where you have it become gray, and then all of a sudden there's a strange white part right here, where there's like all of a sudden like a weird highlight like right here on the corner. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know how the light could ever possibly induce that, and that's really distracting for me. That's what's drawing my eye, and that's because I detect it as a flaw. So I don't know what that is or why that's there, but I feel like that's the biggest mistake that's really detracting from the piece, other than the jar. But very nice work on the eyeball. Okay, here's similar issue. Again, the eyeball's okay, but there's an issue with the composition. The jar is pretty bad. I think you know this. The cork, again, so I like what you did in the sense that you did an experiment here. This is a new experimental way to try to capture a cork, but it feels real flat. And one of the reasons it feels real flat is you have this shading on the jar, and then all of a sudden there's like none of that shading on the cork. So it's not clear to me why you didn't incorporate enough shading on the edges of the cork to mold the cork to make it roundish. It's very, very flat, and it's completely distracting. Composition-wise, the eyeball feels like it's floating on top of the jar rather than in the jar. So I think that was a mistake, in a sense that when you're putting these highlights on the jar, they would come on top of the eyeball. So the eyeball does not feel like it's inside of the jar, and I think that was a mistake. But in terms of capturing the eyeball, I think it's a pretty good eyeball. And if this eyeball, if you were to do this detail in a very, very if this eyeball was a part of a larger composition where you're actually drawing the animal and then you shrunk this eyeball down, it would look real photorealistic. So I think you've done a good job of the eyeball. It's just not compositionally working for me. Here again, similar criticism. This brain is fantastic. Like, this brain is just really well done, really photorealistic. I'm glad that you tried something new. You weren't just trying the eyeballs. You tried something that's challenging. And you really did a good job of capturing it. And I think I get the sense that people spend a lot of time trying to do the object, and then they just have no more energy left for the jar. And so, like, that's the issue here for me, is the brain is photorealistic, and I have this issue with this jar. It's not matching. It's not coming from the same universe as the brain. It's not photorealistic. The lines on the edge of the jar aren't a good way to draw or to paint jars. You never want to paint. I think I've said this a couple times in a couple criticisms, and I think I said this in the class. You never want to paint jars with like sharp lines on the edge. It just feels awkward. It's not how your eye sees glass. And I'm not sure what this paper thing is. Like, I'm not sure what it is. Like, if there was like a piece of paper underneath the lid that was like a seal. I'm just not sure what it is. And it's so flat. It's so consistently shaded that if it was some kind of like a fabric like overlay thing, fabric kind of like seal, the shading in it would be bended and folded. This highlight feels a little awkward. The lid just feels a little sloppy. compared to the brain. Everything's a little sloppy compared to the brain. But fantastic job on the brain. The brain looks really good, and I know that you know this. Alright, this one is really nice. This one is really one of the better compositions. Really worked everything together. Everything feels like it fits together. It's really just a fantastic piece, and I know that for you, I think this is one of the best pieces you've done. So I really am happy to see a real improvement in your capability, and I think that you're exploding in terms of what you can accomplish. So I think you should be really proud of yourself that in this assignment you're really getting one of the top tier turn-ins. This is really nice. I don't have any criticisms on the bottle. The glass part, I tried to do this on mine and I had a tough time doing it. I think you did a really good job capturing the glass imprint here. Looks really nice. Maybe the one criticism I have is the eyeball, the goat eye, feels like it's floating on top of the jar, a little bit like the last one. It doesn't really feel like it's inside of the jar. And I think it feels a little bit like it's part of the label. But that doesn't bother me because it looks really nice. Careful on your O's. This is a little jagged for an O. Be careful about that. And your C's. Alright, this one is really nice. A little bit different approach here. A little bit different way to tackle the challenge here. Doing a full organism, which is really nice. It looks really cutesy. That's a compliment because I think that that's what you were going for, and so you really captured the cutesiness of an opossum, although I think I did say to you in the class, opossums are inherently disgusting, so it's tough for me to view the opossum as cute, but I think you really did a really good job of, if there was an opossum that was cute, it would look like this. I think the jar's pretty good, and where it's sitting on the table, I see that you took my advice and you have raised this a little bit. That's always a good thing to do when you are looking through jars, looking through glass, and trying to capture what it looks like by looking through glass. You always make these optical illusions. That was a really good decision. I think the tail feels a bit thick. I'm not sure if the opossum's tail is always going to be this thick. That's my one criticism in terms of like proportionality. I think the tail's a bit too thick. The bottle looks pretty good. This is what I'm talking about doing glass and sort of infinite gradations, not having real sharp lines on the edge of your glass. I think this is done pretty well. But again, and I said this in class, so I hate to reiterate it here, but the one issue in terms of like the style points for me here, in terms of like the aesthetics of the piece, is I don't get why you're putting a cutesy opossum in like a dead specimen jar. So like if dead things are not cute. So that's the issue for me, is if I'm supposed to interpret it as cute, which I am, I'm now in a position where I'm feeling sorry for the opossum because the opossum is obviously still alive in this specimen jar, and that's cruel. So it's sort of like getting to the aesthetics of, now you're making me feel that this is cruelty to the animal. So again, when you're at the point in your artistic ability where you're effectively capturing everything, now you're at the point where you need to level up and you need to start thinking about, what are you making people feel? What are the causes that you're putting in my brain based on the aesthetics that you're drawing? And what I'm feeling here is I'm feeling really sorry for this opossum because it's cruelty to animals. And so like what you want me to feel is that this animal was cute, which I do feel, but now I feel sorry for it. So like again, like compositionally, I don't think like the best decisions were made here. And I feel like I would have rather wanted to see a dead opossum in the jar, because then I wouldn't feel sorry for it. And the way you could have made it feel dead is like, you don't make the eyeballs lifelike. Eyeballs change in organisms when they die. They get real sickly looking. And again, you would have made things like, it wouldn't be so lifelike. It wouldn't be in such a lifelike pose. So again, the main issues for me are composition-wise. You really, when you're this good of an artist, you need to start thinking about, are the decisions that you're making compositionally making sense to how you want people to feel about your piece? And I feel like that's been a flaw here. Here's a really nice one, and I think this is one of the few people who have really effectively captured a nice label, a nice old school label. So that is just really nice. Obviously this piece is really, really well done. The only issues of awkwardness that I have real issues with are the lid. Like, everything feels so perfect, and then you get to the lid, and the lid is done in a good way, but proportionally, it's not right. It's off proportionately. And it's because this lid was sketched, and you didn't spend time to sort of sketch the perfect dimensionality of the lid. And what you're going to find is that in pieces that are so close to perfect, in pieces that are so good, it's the little things that really make you mad. And so, like, this lid, you could have taken some time. You could have literally just cut this lid in half, copy the left section of it, paste it, and flip it, and it would have been perfectly proportioned, perfectly symmetrical, and then you could have just spent a little bit of time adjusting the highlights so that the highlights are asymmetrical in terms of, like, where the light's hitting it. But it's just like, to me, I just feel like the piece is so perfect, and it's so close to perfect, that there's no excuse to have this weird lid. And the lid kind of, like, it's enough awkwardness that it's sort of like, it throws you off, and it's an easy fix, and you're too talented to leave it like this. Okay, I'm not sure what this is. I think it's like a kidney and maybe like a gallbladder, and I have no idea what this is. And I'm assuming it's in like a bag. The blood, I have issues with the blood, like blood splatters. The drips would not look like this. I think that this part right here, and the kidney, or again, I don't know if this is a kidney or a stomach or whatever. I think this is actually pretty good. Like, if you were to open up a human being, which is I think what you're suggesting because it's Hannibal Lecter's lunch. If you were to open up a human being, like, it would look like this. It would be shiny like this, and it would be bloody. But it just compositionally not doing it for me. Also, I would suggest that the tag is pretty good here. See, here's a student who has done kind of what I've been hoping for, is on the side of the tag there's some scratchy, like, tear. That's what happens when you really make tear, like, tags in the lab. You have the scratchy edges, the jagged edges here based on the tear. So I really want to compliment here that you added in that detail. That actually adds a lot. This tag adds a lot to this piece and brings it a lot higher than where it would be without it. Somebody's telling me that this is a jar and this is the lid. If that's the case, it's not doing it for me. It feels more like a Ziploc bag, and I don't know what the top is, but to me it felt more like a bag. And it feels more like a bag probably because this lid is just not, I'm not seeing it as a lid. It's not drawn as a lid. All right, here's a very nice one. Very nice eyeball. I think it's a human eye. Very nice glass jar, in a sense that the jar, the edges of it, are just enough to let you know that it's contained in something. But I do feel like, see how you put this highlight here above the eye? I feel like the jar itself needs a couple of those in a few areas. So this was a really good decision on the eye. And the pupil feels real good. The iris feels real good. The sclera is real good. But the jar needs some of these highlights to sort of like polish it off. These sharp edge highlights. I think that's what you need. Here's another attempt at the cork. Like, the cork for me is just not quite there. The other issue for me is the glass of the jar, to me, feels like it's so thin. This feels like paper thin jars. Whereas when you look at jars, what you really see is you see the thickness of the glass in the edge. So that's why I was complimenting the student on the jar. You feel the thick, you can actually see with your eye how thick the glass is. In this case, the jar thickness is way too thin. It's way too thin. So it doesn't feel like it's a real jar, and that's what's really distracting for me, is you would have thicker edges of the jar. The thickness of the glass is too thin. And I think that the thickness of the jar is one reason why the cork is so distracting for me, because the cork feels like it's so close to the edge. It would be much smaller. Like, it would maybe like start like here. I'll show you when I get to my cork. Maybe I'll pull up my cork right now. Like, here's mine. Here's my cork. Here, see how much edge I left between the cork and the jar, and that's because that's what it would look like. So your cork is just way too close to the edge, whereas I left enough space in my cork to make it feel a little bit more realistic, like it fits inside, giving room for the thickness of the jar. So I might as well just talk about mine now. Obviously, some areas of it are a little bit sloppy, like down here, but the sloppiness didn't bother me too much because I felt like what I was trying to do is I was trying to imagine, like, okay, what would happen if you took a vampire bat and you literally like smashed its volume into this small jar? So like I was trying to sort of like, what would it look like if there was literally not enough volume to hold the organism and you literally like smashed it in there. And so what I had envisioned was you smashed it in a way where the head sort of like bent up and its neck would have been behind. And I tried to do that, and earlier in some sketches I had drawn some wings in the background. And I think ultimately I failed in that. I think it doesn't look like a real vampire bat in a jar. That's the issue for me, is I think compositionally it looks real good. But it looks more like a label. Like it looks more like this would be like a sticker that you would put on a jar. It doesn't look to me like a realistic vampire bat smashed in a jar. And I failed in a sense that the head is okay, but I think it would have to be a little bit smaller. I don't have any of the wings in the background. I don't have any of the claws. If I had more time and I spent a little bit more effort, I think I would have tried to fix that a little bit. But compositionally, I like it, because I think it feels a little bit more like a label. And I think I did a really good job on the jar. And I think I did a really good job on the color that you get from whiskey, and incorporating the color a little bit over the bat, but yet still allowing you to see the bat. And I think I did a really good job on my cork. So I really like this piece. I like what I did, but it definitely has some flaws. The eyeballs are a little bit of a flaw. I think the eyeballs have a little bit too much pop. I think I should have coated them with some of the orange color. And I think it was a mistake to not do that. Well, maybe I'll try to improve next year. All right, here's a really nice one. I just talked about for like 10 minutes without recording it, so I'm going to try to recapture everything I just said. Hopefully I'm not repeating things. What I had said was the eye is beautiful. The eyeball is perfect. I have no criticism of the eyeball. I have no criticism of the jar lid. I have no criticism of the top of the jar. Where I have criticism is where the jar meets the shadow. Where the jar meets the shadow, it doesn't feel right at all. It feels like you drew the jar on a piece of paper and you cut it out with the scissors and you put a flat piece of paper on top of this other piece of paper that had some shading underneath it. That's what it feels like. So the way that this jar meets the shadow, it's not done right. It's not done properly. I also had criticism in this region here and this region here, where what I had said previously about jars is that in glass, you can see the thickness of the glass all the way down the jar, like in this one. In this one, you started doing that, and here you have made some nice asymmetrical lines which are showing the thickness of the jar, and then all of a sudden those things disappear here. And you've taken this gray part and you've extended it all the way to the edge of the jar, where that would not happen if this was a real jar. If this was a real jar, this white part, this whiter part, would extend further down in this. Same thing here. This whiter part, all of a sudden you have this gray here, which I know what it is. It's this part of the line that you're seeing, but that's not how it would see. You wouldn't see it like that. This white part would extend down, further down, and then you would only start to see this white edge, like right here, and right like here. So it's these parts that are not doing it for me. It's literally like this part down here that's really bothering me. But really fantastic eye. Everybody knows that. Really fantastic jar. It's very well done. Just a little bit of room for improvement on seeing through glass. I would encourage you to set up some glass jars on your table and just do some quick still lifes and some quick sketches looking through the glass and looking through objects through the glass. I did this in the past with a woodcut that I did on whiskey jars and a treasure chest, and I really found that this experience was really valuable to me. And I never forgot the lessons that I learned about drawing jars from this woodcut. So I would encourage you to try something very similar and put yourself in situations where you have to draw things like this, where you're seeing other things through multiple layers of glass bottles. And it's really an interesting challenge, and you'll never forget what you learned doing that. All right, here's another really, really nice one. This is a really good improvement for you. You just really one of your most fantastic pieces. I think you did a really great job capturing the jar. The jar is one of the most interesting jars we've seen. It's perfectly symmetrical. The highlights are done really, really well. It feels realistic. The eyeball feels really realistic. I think it's just really, really well done. The one thing that might composition-wise makes it feel a little bit off is the eye has very, very sharp highlights, whereas the jar highlights are very, very blurry. So you have a little bit of a different universe in terms of what your highlights look like. But it's not a big issue for me. I think it could improve a little bit if perhaps you use the same style of highlights down here on the eyeball as you use on the jar, or perhaps using the sharp highlights on the jar. But overall, this is really, really nice. I really don't have any criticisms of this. It's a fantastic piece. This one's just a bit too cartoony for me. I feel like on the eyeball, it's just too cartoony. I like what you're trying to do in here in sort of bending and refracting light and putting in kind of like rainbows. I like that. I think that was a really good idea. I think that was a good experiment. But overall, I just think that the sketchiness of the piece is just a little bit too quickly done. It's just a little bit too cursory. I also think some of the symmetrics of the glass could have been fixed quite easily. Again, sort of sketching it out, just copying the left half, pasting it, and transforming it to the right side would make it perfectly symmetrical, and that would solve a couple of the issues and sort of the awkwardness of this lid. Again, and that would not take that much work. So again, like little improvements technically can be easily implemented to improve things like this. I also would say, I do think you're trying to do it quickly. And in a sense, I've said before that sometimes trying to do things quickly, sometimes you learn a lot, actually. It's not necessarily a bad thing to try to do things in a quick, sort of sketchy way. And so I hope that you learned a lot while doing this. And sometimes, again, that skill can be real valuable. So I hope that you're building up your skill set with sort of learning how to sketch quick, learning how to sketch out shapes quick, sketch out shading quick. And I think that's going to pay off in the end. All right, here's another one. I think this was a fictional eye, so it's interesting to see a fictional eye. I think that these dark lines feel a little weird. Like these dark parts just feel a little bit weird. I would reduce the opacity on those a lot. I think it might make it look better. I would do some experiments on erasing some of those and reducing the opacity. I think the lid's pretty good in general, although the asymmetry of it bothers me. Again, another case where you could have literally just taken half the lid, copied it, pasted it, flipped it, put it together perfectly, and then just adjusted some of the highlighting of the shading to make it more realistic. It bothers me that it's like lower on this end. It's not symmetrical. These gray lines are bothering me. These sharp gray lines, those are bothering me. And I know that in the class I suggested to you to shut off. You had some dark lines on the edge. I think that helped. I think that helped a lot. And we talked about drawing the shadow behind, coming from behind. I think you did a good job of that, although I think it would be, well, it depends on where the wall is behind it. So this is actually, the shadow's done pretty well. I would make the edge of the eyeball even just a bit darker here. So I feel like a little bit of room for improvement here, but I think overall, I think this is a very nice piece overall. This one is really nice, and this is really a step up. And this is one of your nicest products that you produce in this class. I really like this one. I love the eyeball. I love the internal sides of the eyeball. You've got lots of colors in the iris. The highlights look really nice. It's just really nice. The bubbles look really good. The spider webs are a nice detail. The shadow looks perfect. The bottle is really well done. I do have some issues with down here. Down here, the bottom of the bottle, like, I don't understand why this rounded part is so far in. Like, you should just literally take this layer and stretch it out so that it hits about here. Like, just little awkward things about the bottle kind of upset me. Like, this should be moved over more. The cork, again, like corks, people have found corks hard, although I think this is one of the most effective treatments of the cork, but I do have some issues with it. It feels so flat. and you've done good shading and forming and molding of the eyeball, but you didn't spend equal time shading and molding the formation of this rounded cork. So the cork just feels so flat, and that's the worst part about this piece. Everything else is so strong, but the cork feels too flat. But overall, this is a really fantastic piece. The background color fits perfectly. It's compositionally, it's one of the best ones in the class. This one is just really nice. I'm really happy to see this come out of you. All right, again here, some similar criticisms. The eyeball is really nice, photorealistic, looks like a really nice eyeball. But these bubbles are very nice too. These bubbles, that's very, very nice. I didn't notice that before. Now I'm noticing that. It's a very nice detail, these bubbles. Similar issue though that we just had with the bottle. Like, this round part should be extended over here. Why are people drawing these round parts of the bottles right here, like so far in to the right? It should be extended to the left. It would be more like here. I don't know why people are doing that. It's strange to me. The lid feels off. Again, it's the asymmetry of it. Like, it's not a symmetrical lid. Again, this would be so easy to just copy the left side of it, paste it, flip it, and make it match perfectly. Get the symmetry. The lid bothers me, but everything else is done really, really nice, except for this region down here, which I was saying. Extend this further left next time. But very, very nice. Very nice eyeball. All right, this is the last one. This was an experiment she was discussing in class, and this worked out really well. This looks really nice. It's a totally different style. The shadow is just phenomenal. I think this looks really nice, and I think these experiments that you're doing really paid off. I really love this one. Looks really nice. I really don't have any criticisms. Like, there's nothing that I look at this and say, oh, I would have done this different. It looks really nice. Fantastic.